Colorado more than a touchdown underdog against Nebraska, who they beat by 22 last year? I think that's right.
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth, getting you ready for another thrilling weekend of college football. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Today's show is a show of prove it teams. Prove to me you're good, Nebraska. Prove to me you're a Big 12 title contender, Kansas. Georgia Tech, what can you prove this weekend? All coming up on today's show. But that's Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs, joining me to talk Colorado and Nebraska. The reason I think this is right, Kevin, this line of 7.5 in favor of the Cornhuskers, who I think are going to win the football game, is as I talked about last week when I did a reaction episode to Colorado and North Dakota State. This Colorado team is better than they were last year. They're not a Big 12 championship contender, at least not from what I have seen so far or what I thought about them coming into the year. They are better. But the leaps and bounds of improvement Nebraska showed in week one, albeit against UTEP, I think is more substantial than Colorado's improvement from last year. And they're at home. I think Nebraska can cover that 7.5 point number.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we have to look at what Nebraska was bad at last year. And it was like they were, I won't say historically bad on offense, but you would have looked at their offense.
Why do you not want to say historically bad? I want to say that. Okay, I want everyone to know that.
They were military academy-esque in the passing game. And the problem was they wanted to have a passing game, whereas the military academies typically don't care about that. So they obviously got a lot better with Dylan Raiola. I'm not going to discredit that. Isaiah Nayor, the Texas transfer, former Wyoming star, a lot better. And I think that's why this game will be somewhat of a shootout. But when it comes to them being, 7.5 favorites, I think that at that point you're just asking who I think will win, right? And I think for Colorado, I trust Shedeur Sanders more than Dylan Raiola. And now it doesn't only come down to the quarterbacks, as some of our fellow coworkers like to point out. If it is a shootout, I'm going off of who I trust more. And right now, I trust Shedeur Sanders more just because I've only seen Dylan Raiola against a UTEP team that is probably 130 or 133 out of 134. So that's kind of a tough evaluation there.
Yeah, I agree with you that if you go shootout, I lean Shedeur Sanders. He's got the experience. Raiola's a mega talent. He's playing in his second college football game. Shedeur Sanders has played in just a few more than that. And Colorado's offense looked about how I expected it to last week. The offensive line, better. Not great, not amazing, but better. Substantially better. The defensive line, better. They held North Dakota State to under 4 yards per carry last week. Last year, if North Dakota State rolls into Boulder, they probably run for at least 200, maybe even pushing 250. So they have definitely improved. The reason I like Nebraska, though, Kevin, is this Nebraska defense is quite good. It was really good last year. They were just missing a quarterback. I think they've got one. I'd feel better about Colorado if this were Raiola's first game, but he's gotten one under his belt. 19-27, 237 yards, couple touchdowns. Nebraska with a 100-yard receiver. Their leading receiver last year had just over 300 yards on the year. I mean, it's just one of the worst offensive stats I have ever seen. How do you feel like this Buffs offense needs to attack the Nebraska defense?
Yeah, I think they don't have room for error is how I'm going to put it, right? Like I think every drive they touch the ball, it needs to end in points or it needs to end in a fashion where they force Nebraska to drive all the way down the field. I don't really know if Colorado's defense, I walked away from that North Dakota State game feeling iffy about the defense. So I look at this offense and the criticisms that Joe Klatt has had. I think you've offered these criticisms as well. And a lot of people is Colorado's team is based off of their offensive stars, right? And so you cannot have those guys show up and lay an egg. You cannot have a risky 4th and 1 call that doesn't go your way. You can't have dropped passes, penalties, a run game that doesn't get you a first down.
An interception off a guy's foot in the end zone.
Like, it's really weird. Like, that's very dodgeball-esque, like 8th grade, where it tips off someone and they catch it, right? But like, if you're Colorado, your offense needs to be nearly perfect. And I just think that's to make up for what we saw from the defense, because Cam Miller coming into the North Dakota State game, he was not renowned as this all-world passer, and he kind of just took what Colorado's defense gave him and he picked them apart by doing it. And so the offense needs to be perfect to sort of combat what the defense may struggle with.
Yeah, Colorado can absolutely win this game. The reason I think the line is appropriate, though, is Nebraska can win this game by 10 plus points. I don't see Colorado as being able to do that. I know they won by a lot last year, but a quarterback can make all the difference. A couple of years ago, Oklahoma lost to Texas by a score of 49-0. Why? Dylan Gabriel was hurt. Dylan Gabriel plays in the game last year, and they win the game outright. So, yes, a quarterback can, in fact, make that much of a difference. Or, for Colorado fans, remember the Pac-12, RIP. Oregon played Utah in 2022. Final score, Ducks 20, Utes 17. Cam Rising played. He played poorly, but he played. Bryson Barnes plays last year. They go to Salt Lake City. Oregon wins 35-6. A quarterback can make that much of a difference. I liked what I saw from Dylan Raiola. I think Nebraska is the more complete football team here, and there are more ways for them to win. Emmett Ramir Johnson, I don't believe they're related, but they both were over 50 yards. Dante Dowdell, the Oregon transfer, was also over 50 yards on the ground. This Nebraska offense, they were explosive, they were balanced, they were capable. I think they bring more to the table holistically than Colorado does. I'd still lean towards Colorado's offense, but if I say Colorado's offense is an 8 out of 10 and Nebraska's a 7 out of 10, well, I think Nebraska's defense is about an 8 out of 10 and Colorado's is like a 5 or a 6.
Yeah, the defense is the concerning part for me. I do want to give them credit, though. I'm going to say shut down North Dakota State on the ground, but North Dakota State's leading rusher was their quarterback, and the rest of their tailbacks, I think they averaged the best was around three yards per carry. So very dramatic improvement for Colorado, and I think that's going to be a key for them this week, right? If they could slow down Nebraska's run game, which you just talked about being balanced, which is a great thing to have, which Colorado does not have at the moment, balance. It forces all the pressure on Dylan Raiola. Like, if you can't be like, hey, we're going to turn around, hand the ball off, and get you 5. Now you're at 2nd and 5. If it's like, hey, we need you to throw long to intermediate passes to move us down the field, I think that puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And that's where I think Colorado's defense sort of comes into play. But yeah, Colorado needs a strong showing from their defense, a lot better showing from their secondary specifically, and they need the run game to wake up. We haven't really seen in the 2 years that Deion Sanders has been in Boulder, we have not seen them have a run game where it's useful. And I don't really know like what the problem is, if it's play calling, the situations. I think last week they gave up on it way too early. It felt like after the first half, they stopped running the ball entirely. And they got a little creative at first with Draylon Miller. They used him like a Deebo Samuel type, gave him 2 touches, and then we're like, okay, thank you for your service. And now they're starting a former walk-on at running back. Like, something needs to, I don't know what it is, something needs to happen. Someone needs to step up, but that's my sort of evaluation of Colorado's run game and their defense. They need a big game as well.
One interesting angle about this game, Nebraska has one of the most favorable schedules in all of Power 4. If they win this game, they are going to have the ability, I don't think they will, I'm just saying they'll have the ability to be unbeaten going into Ohio State, and this is the part where I don't know if they will, they can push for a college football playoff spot. My preseason record prediction for them is 9-3, and that's all very much in play. So let's wrap real quick with our predictions here, Kevin. I've got the Cornhuskers winning this game 34-23 over the Buffs in Lincoln, and Matt Rule improves to 2-0.
Yeah, I think Colorado wins a close one. I think this is a touchdown matchup. I think I said 35-28 yesterday, and I think I'm going to stick with that again. I just think it's going to be a shootout, right? I think the offenses are going to match each other blow for blow. And so at that point, it's who do you trust with the ball in their hands late in the game? And so far, that person's been Shedeur Sanders. We saw it against Arizona State. We saw it against Colorado State. And we saw it against TCU. Like, he's come up with big plays when Colorado needs him the most down the stretch. And so I think Colorado will win this game. And if they don't, I think it's going to be a good barometer for how good this team is.
Kevin Borba, Locked On Buffs. Kevin, enjoyed as always.
Thank you.
Kansas is playing the most under-the-radar game in all of college football this week. Are they going to win? What happens if they do win? That's coming up next. First, a reminder, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. You know why? Because it's America's #1 sportsbook. They have everything you could possibly want for college football. If you think I am a moron for picking Colorado to lose by 10 or more points in this game, guess what? They're getting 7.5. You can go bet that over at FanDuel and everything else. And we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you're able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Go get your college football gambling fix over at FanDuel. Point spreads, they're moving all the time. Over-unders, money line, everything you want, they've got it. FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, our official sportsbook sponsor here at the Locked On Network. The most important game that nobody's talking about is Kansas at Illinois. That's Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks, joining me here on the show. Kind of a big week for me, Derek, because I picked Kansas to make the Big 12 championship game this year. And if you are a team of that caliber, this is a game as a 5-point road favorite against an Illinois team that you go in and win, and you look pretty good doing it.
Yeah, I think what you just brought up is kind of funny because that's kind of the process I've been taking myself through for this game, that this game doesn't matter. Like this game, if you're talking Big 12 championship, you're talking college football playoff, like this doesn't matter to that. You could lose this game and win the rest, and you're still winning the Big 12 championship. But what you just said, if you're going to do those other things, this feels like a precursor to that, just in terms of this is one that if you are going to beat, Kansas State or Iowa State or some of these other schools, those games should be a little bit harder than this game is, right? So go out there and win this game. And last year, I think it was a good springboard for them early in the season. You beat them in week 2, and it set up some positive momentum. And I think that's what you come out of this with as well. You win this game, you set up some early season momentum, especially into that UNLV game in week 3, which looks a little bit more interesting after they kind of just beat up on Houston.
Do not overlook UNLV. They throttled Houston. Now, granted, Houston might go 0-12 this year. That is a very real possibility when you look at their schedule and what everybody's expectations are for them coming into this year, mine included. I thought they'd lose to UNLV. Didn't think they would lose that badly. UNLV's got a couple of interesting FBS games. They also play Syracuse, or Power 4 games, rather. But getting back to this matchup, Kansas, Illinois. Kansas wins the game if what, Derek?
I think it goes a couple ways. If you want to look at stopping the running game of Illinois, you look at the games that Kansas is giving up, 4.5 or more yards per carry over the time that Brian Borland and Lance Leipold is here. They're losing basically a majority of those games, versus when you're giving up way less, the record is outstanding in what they've been able to do. And what do you look at with a Brett Bielema offense with Illinois? You look at them being a team who wants to establish the run, be physical. I think they have the most drafted offensive linemen of any active head coach under Brett Bielema now that Nick Saban has retired. And last year, the offensive line had kind of a down year, but it seems like this year maybe back up more to snuff. They had a J.C. Davis, who's a really good left tackle transfer from New Mexico. And they have a 6'3", 250-pound running back, Caden Fagan, who didn't really play in the Kansas game. I think he had 1 carry for 3 or 4 yards in that game. He came on late as the season went on last year as a freshman. If you can slow him down and stop the running game a little bit, I feel good about the Kansas offense being able to put up points in this game. Illinois' secondary was not good last year. It might be a little bit better this year. We'll wait and see. Tough to tell based on what they did in week 1 against Eastern Illinois. The defensive line for Illinois, they departed a couple key players. Jerzon Newton was probably the best defender in that game against Kansas last year and had a couple good pressures, but he's gone. Basically, you lose a lot on the D-line, and they only had 1 sack against Eastern Illinois. They only had 3 tackles for loss. Now, they do have a good linebacking core, but still, I feel like Kansas, which got over 200 rushing yards from Devin Neal, Daniel Highshaw last year against Illinois, which had Jalen Daniels in that game, and he was able to hit some big passing plays downfield. I think Kansas is going to be able to score enough. It's, are you able to stop the run and get their offense off the field and prevent them from playing a possession game where they keep your offense off the field?
One of the highest profile coordinator hires in the offseason was Andy Kotelnicki, poached away from Kansas. He's over at Penn State, made immediate impact in their first game against West Virginia in week 1 in a dominant win. How do you feel about this Kansas offense without him there?
So I feel good right now. Jeff Grimes came in during the pre-season or the pre-bowl practices, I guess you would say. And the staff made sure that he was coming along to join with their lingo, with some of their formations, their play calling. He was going to obviously, and he is, calling plays and he is adding his own flair and twist on everything and some of what he likes to do, which seems to be more jet sweeps and screens than maybe what Andy Kotelnicki was running. But for the most part, it's a very similar offense to what they were running. And that was part of the idea of wanting to go out and make that hire. So I feel good about where the offense is at. I actually think that Jeff Grimes is a better recruiter than Andy Kotelnicki, and we're seeing that on the recruiting trail. Kotelnicki wasn't really bringing those guys in. As far as the game day play calling, there's two things that'll be interesting. One is just, does it have the same flow and creativity now that we're getting into the real games? Because it's not a real playbook against the FCS opponent. You're not going to give out everything that you want to do that they did against Lindenwood. So I think we're going to learn a little bit more this one. But the other part that I think can actually be a boon for Kansas, even if maybe the creativity is a little more lacking, maybe if Andy Kotelnicki is a little bit of an in-game caller, one thing that they can get back is that, and part of this is on the head coach as well, is the aggressiveness on fourth downs. So Kansas has not been an aggressive team. They've been basically bottom 2 in the Big 12 the last 2 seasons in terms of going for it on fourth down. And when you have what for Kansas has been a really good offense with good quarterback play and has been not as good of a defense, you would think they would be more aggressive on those fourth down play calls. And again, I don't know where Lance Leipold versus Jeff Grimes kind of comes in versus Andy Kotelnicki comes into all that, but you look at what Jeff Grimes did at Baylor, and they went for fourth down over 90 times in the last 2 years at Baylor. Kansas during that same period was less than half that mark. So if you are going for it more on fourth down, you're aggressive. And we saw that a little bit in the FCS game. They had a couple fourth downs that they went for. They had a 4th and goal that they went for. With some of the backups in the early part of the third quarter. I think that's a way that they can actually be a little bit better on the offensive side of the football. So this will be the good test, though, just to see how different really the play calling in the offense is. But in week 1, you didn't really notice much.
I don't have super high hopes for Illinois this year. I don't think Brett Bielema is bad. He's actually had a more successful first few years than any Illinois coach in recent memory. And Luke Altmaier can run. He has his moments throwing the ball. He's also had a 4-interception game. That's what a lot of people think of, and I don't think that's a completely fair assessment. But when you look at this Jayhawks defense, you got to slow down Luke Altmaier. Maybe force a turnover or two. How did the Jayhawks go about doing that?
Well, so the good news, Altmaier had 14 turnovers last year, and he, I think, started 9 games, so it wasn't a full slate for him. You look at the first game, he did a good job protecting the football, but that's been in his DNA. And Kansas is a ball hawking secondary. You look at Mello Dotson, he had a pick 6 just last week. He had a couple touchdowns a season ago. He actually just last week broke the record for most pick 6s ahead of like Aqib Talib and some of these other guys for what he's been able to do.
Aqib Talib, what a great name.
I know,
what a great throwback name. Maybe the only old school Kansas football player that anybody listening to or watching this show knows.
Well, and so you might be hearing it again because he has a chance to pass him in like yards if he gets another pick. And then Kobe Bryant has a bunch of picks. OJ Burrows is kind of this ball hawking safety. So they're good at forcing interceptions. Last season, they forced one of the highest rates. I think they were 2nd and 3rd in the Big 12 in terms of forced fumbles, but they were like in the bottom half in terms of recoveries. So maybe you get more fumble luck in this game. But you got 2 interceptions off of Altmaier last year. And so I think Kansas is going to be good with the turnovers. The one that I'll be watching in this game is how do you stop his scrambling ability? You kind of talked about it there. You briefly mentioned that he can run a little bit, and he had like a 72-yard touchdown, which was, if you go back and watch the game, it was just a mistake by the KU defense. Like, he didn't get touched going to the end zone. Nobody was within like 20 yards of him. He just kind of strolled into the end zone. And he's been a good rushing quarterback. I was surprised when I read one of the preseason magazines and it said that he had the most scramble yards of any quarterback in the Big Ten, which then you start thinking about it and you're like, okay, well, like Justin Fields isn't here anymore. So like maybe that makes sense. But Kansas has struggled over the last couple of years. That's been one bugaboo for them with Brian Borland as the defense coordinator, stopping rushing quarterbacks, stopping scrambling quarterbacks. So I think they'll get a couple turnover-worthy plays. You obviously got to take advantage of them. Good news is they've been doing that with the personnel they have over the past couple of years, but you also got to figure out a way to stop the QB run.
It's regret the graphic time, Derek. Let's make our predictions here. I will start. I'm still riding the Jayhawks. I feel great about them here. They're a 5-point favorite. I know this game is on the road. I'll take the Jayhawks to win 34-24 I think they go into Illinois and walk away with a win.
So I actually heard this is the first sellout that Illinois has had since like 2016, 2015, something like that, which is just bonkers to think about. That like, I don't know how many times they hosted Michigan or Ohio State in there and stuff during that span. But what I've since heard, because at first you start thinking, this could be a tough road environment, is that there's going to be a lot of Kansas fans traveling up to the game. It's driving distance away. I think this could be a cushiony road environment for KU. So I think the other day I gave a prediction of 31-27. I'm going to actually move that up a little bit and say they cover. I'll go with 34-27 final score.
That's how it's playing out in the most under-the-radar game in all of college football. Derek Johnson, Locked On Jayhawks. Derek, appreciate it.
Absolutely.
What are we going to learn about Georgia Tech this week? You talk about interesting games that are flying under the radar. Kansas, Illinois is number 1. Georgia Tech at Syracuse. That is this week, and that might be game number 2. Tell you why you need to care about that coming up next. First, let's talk about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. Not the wrong ones, the right ones. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role in a given month. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit another leading job site because if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. 86%. That is exquisite. If a quarterback completes 86% of his passes, you think he is out of this world good. That's how good LinkedIn Jobs is. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Georgia Tech, let's have a conversation. You and me. That's all it is. It's you and me, Tech fans, right here. Let's just have an honest conversation here. Do you think you're an ACC title contender? Do you think you actually have what it takes to play with Miami and Clemson and, well, I don't know who else looks like a contender so far. We know Florida State certainly is not, but that creates an opportunity for Georgia Tech because they beat Florida State head-to-head. And then they picked up a win last week because, well, it was a game, frankly, that they should have won, and they did. And now the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets find themselves inside the AP Top 25, coming in at number 23 this week. If you want to be an ACC title contender, you'll win this football game against Syracuse. That's it. That no ifs, ands, or buts about it. If Georgia Tech is legit, they will win this game. That doesn't mean that if Georgia Tech wins this game, I'm going to say, oh, they're automatically on Miami's level or they're at Clemson's level. I'm not selling my Clemson stock. I think their front four is really good, and I think Georgia is just better than quite literally everybody else in all of college football. They've been my national title pick all offseason. I'm yet to see anything that causes me to shift that particular prediction, but I digress. Georgia Tech is trying to elevate itself, is trying to put itself in a class where it hasn't been in quite a long time, where nobody expected it to be, perhaps outside of that program going into this year. If you do that, you win this game against Syracuse. Full stop. Full stop. That's just the way it goes. There are no excuses. There's no, well, there was this, well, there was that. Nope. If you're that good, you'll go in and win this game. This is a fascinating matchup. This is a fascinating matchup. Game is going to be played in the good old JMA Wireless Dome up there in New York. And this is a tight point spread. You know why? Because Syracuse looked pretty good in week 1. Tell me, if you didn't watch Syracuse in week 1, what do you think Kyle McCord's stats were against Ohio? Almost said Idaho, but it's Ohio out of the Mid-American Conference. What do you think his stats were? Oh, that's right. He went for over 350 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was 27 of 39 passing the football. That's the good news if you're Syracuse. Game 1, win 1 for Fran Brown. And Kyle McCord, Ohio State starting quarterback last year, who was one drive away from winning the Big Ten and having a chance to play for a national championship, comes in and right away looks like the sort of guy who you want and who you need to help elevate your program and kickstart year 1 of the Fran Brown era off to a strong start. Now, Syracuse has had a reputation in the past. This could be a new era of starting strong and then kind of falling off. The interesting thing about this game for Syracuse is their schedule one of the easiest in the entire ACC. They do have all three of NC State, Virginia Tech, and Miami, but there is no Clemson. There is no Florida State. Maybe now they wish that they had Florida State on the schedule. But this is an ACC matchup that is going to be highly, highly intriguing, because if Syracuse is going to make some noise in the conference and perhaps navigate that schedule to push for an ACC title berth, then this is a game that they will win. But Georgia Tech made a statement to the entire world in week 0 against Florida State in Ireland, which is, hey, we're better than you think. And of course it turns out that Florida State is not as good as we thought they were, which is why I come back to the importance of this game. If you're going to get to the top of the ACC, you go and win this football game. So here's the interesting thing. Last week, Syracuse got a win against Ohio, again, Mid-American Conference team, so not an FCS, but not a high-level group of 5. And they won the game 38-22. Well, that's great. That's great. You know what's not great? They allowed over 200 yards on the ground. Excuse me? Excuse me, to Ohio. Ohio. O-H-I-O. Not Ohio State, just Ohio. It wasn't even just over 200. One guy was over 200. This was a 290-yard rushing effort from the Bobcats. That has to be better. If you're Syracuse going into this game against Georgia Tech, I've got news for you. If you allow over 200 rushing yards, you're not going to win. You're just not. You need to force Georgia Tech to do what they have not shown that they can do so far, which is consistently pass the football with Haynes King. Haynes King is averaging 210 passing yards per game. They only threw it 16 times in their week 1 win against Florida State. You know why? That's all Brent Key wants to do. Brent Key is an offensive line guy. He wants to, as he says in his own words, run the ball. That's what he wants to do. You give up 290 yards to Ohio, you better not let Georgia Tech come in there and run for over 200 yards. If so, that's what Josh Pate might call a padlock stat. Game will be over. You have no chance, because they will balance you to death. They will outbalance, they will counterbalance, if you will. Not only will they not try and have an even number of rushes and passes, they will have more rushes than passes if you can't stop the run. So Syracuse has to be able to force Haynes King to throw the football. And, Haynes King has done a nice job in the first couple of weeks, but he hasn't had to make too many high leverage throws. Why? Because they're running the ball so incredibly well. Jamal Haynes at running back, averaging about 80 yards a game through the first couple of contests so far, could be in for a big game. That was the case for Ohio running back Anthony Tyus III last week. He had 203 yards rushing on 16 carries. He only had a long of 46. There wasn't even a 50-yard carry in there. And he had 203 yards rushing on 16 carries. That has to be better. So I suspect Georgia Tech wants to come out and run the football, not just because that's been their identity through the first couple of weeks. They had over 200 yards rushing and over 200 yards passing in their matchup last week, but because Syracuse's inability through, granted, it's just one game. It's just one game. Georgia Tech has played 2. Syracuse has played 1. The inability of them to stop the run makes me think, yeah, they're going to lean into that strength even more. So that's the defining trait about this game. If Georgia Tech runs the ball, I don't think Syracuse is going to be able to stop them, because they're not going to get pass happy. They're not going to deviate from their tendencies. They know what they are good at. They know how they want to win football games. And it's why I think Georgia Tech will win this football game. It's twofold. Number 1, the rushing attack, I think, is going to be there. Number 2 in this matchup is that's the number of games that Georgia Tech has played. So Syracuse got the opportunity to work out some kinks to play Ohio, but Georgia Tech is going into game number 3. So all those little things that get sharpened throughout the course of a season, that get a little bit better, Georgia Tech is just a little bit further ahead than where Syracuse is. Brent Key, second full season. He was the interim at the end of 2022, of course. I also like the coaching continuity with a returning quarterback over a new quarterback in Kyle McCord, who looked great last week and could very well have a great game against Georgia Tech in this spot. But first-year quarterback, first-year head coach, second-year quarterback, second full-year head coach. I'm going with the road team here. I'm going with Georgia Tech to win the game. This should be a really exciting football game. And if Georgia Tech wins, you got to take them seriously as a team that can push to get to the top of the conference. Will they have more games to prove? Will they have more to showcase, to prove to themselves and everybody else that, hey, we're not just a flash in the pan? Yes, but this is step one along that particular path. I like Georgia Tech. Give me the Yellow Jackets. 27-23. They get it done. Plenty more content coming your way this week because, well, there are plenty more games. So tune in tomorrow. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.